start with taking a quick poll. How many people here, raise your hand, feel they know and can define what long-term sustainable happiness means to you? Cool, that's actually higher than average. Usually there's like 2 or 3 hands in the crowd. But what's interesting about that is that that's really the case, that most of the people in this world, according to studies and research, can't help define for themselves what can keep them long-term sustainably happy. Take this for example. Stella, top right. She just got a financial statement from Merrill Lynch. She's thinking, you know, I saved all my money, I invested all my 401k, now it's all gone. Bottom right, Samantha. She thought that perhaps if I get a boyfriend at this age, it might be a good idea. Clearly, after this call, this was not the case. But in all seriousness, I mean, taking it back to this room again, take a moment to think, what are your own goals in your life? And what's interesting about this question is that no matter who you are, if you ask yourself why enough times, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to get married and have kids, I want a great home, I want a great car. If you ask yourself why enough times, it usually comes back to the same thing, happiness. So what I thought was interesting about this is that, and this is back to research that's been done about all this, what we call science of happiness. And when I talk about happiness, it's not necessarily the kumbaya kind of happiness, not that there's anything wrong with it if you do it, but it's based on the research and studies done on science of happiness and positive psychology. And one of the studies that shows is that we as humans are super bad at predicting what makes us long-term sustainably happy. So why is that? Like you hear a lot of times people around you saying, oh, when I achieve this, then I'll be happy. Or when I get that, I'll be happy. And everyone has heard about the lottery winners. Like if you take a poll at the time they win the lottery and a month, a year, 5 years out, sometimes there's the same level of happiness, if not lower. And what's also curious and interesting is the inverse is true. There's been studies done on people that lose their they lose their use of limbs, become paraplegic. And doing the studies of the time it happens and 1 year and 5 years down the road, it's interesting that sometimes it's not just the same level of happiness, but they're actually happier. So I thought this was really curious. Because most people say that this is the case, but when it comes down to it, happiness isn't easy. It actually isn't natural at all. And it's a way we look at it is like a skill that you actually learn over time, because really what it constitutes is what are we actually thinking every day and what are we actually acting upon and doing every day based on these thoughts of, can I be happy in life? So taking a moment, I started reflecting, before coming into this role as Delivering Happiness CEO, I started thinking, like, why am I in this position in life? And so I started reflecting, because thinking about my own childhood, I wasn't the happy-go-lucky kid at all. I was like more of the brooding type, thinking about existential thoughts and listening to The Cure. And so I started thinking, I guess I started, like, the train of thought ended up where I started going to school at Cal. I went to UC Berkeley. And at that time, I know, like, I'm an Asian American. I'm sure this happens in other ethnicities as well, but parents have a certain kind of mold that you needed to be in life. So I felt growing up that I had the formula of what it takes to be successful. Number 1 was get into a good school. Number 2 was become a doctor or a lawyer. And number 3 was learn a variety of musical instruments. And so for me, I thought I had it made. I got into Cal. I was studying pre-med. I had a few years of piano on my belt. I thought I was making my parents happy. But when I started studying, I realized, this is totally not for me. So I started just exploring. And I eventually found something called Asian American Studies. And I majored in that, because it made me feel passionate for the first time in school. And so when I told my parents, they basically freaked out. He said, seriously? We're sacrificing all these things for you and your brothers. We're working all these jobs. Your great-great-grandparents sailed the Pacific Ocean in an ocean liner and almost died so that you can study yourself. And guilt-ridden as I was, I just put my foot down, I'm going to do it. And so I remember that time I graduated, I was so, happy-go-lucky, I'm ready to face the world, and I remember that moment. And then I started freaking out because I couldn't find a job. And so I just started cold calling every company I knew, and just for me, just because of luck and timing, the internet was born at that same time. So I became an internet consultant. And I thought, well, life is easy. The money, the title, the status just came like that. And I thought, yeah, this isn't too bad after all. But as everyone knows, the dot-com busted in the late 90s, and I got laid off. And I felt like the most ultimate, biggest failure. Because all those things that I thought were meaningful, the money, title, status, really meant nothing at all. So at that point, I took a reflection of my own life, like, what am I doing these things for on a day-to-day basis? And Delivering Happiness actually started as a book. Has anyone read it by any chance? Oh, cool. So you remember in the book when Tony and I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And so what's interesting here is that I had been laid off. Tony had sold Link Exchange to Microsoft not too long before. And it was interesting, we didn't know it at the time, but until we worked on this book, realized that we were both thinking the same thing. What am I gonna do for the rest of my life that will make me happy, that I'm super passionate about every day? Obviously, we're, after being laid off and him selling his company, opposite spectrums of the financial scale, but thinking the same thing. And it wasn't until I came back, ready to face the world again, ready to go for my passions, that one moment, and everyone has this happen at least once in their life, where the rug gets taken away from you and you're totally changed, your world is 180. And for me, that personal circumstance is when I lost my dad. So it really, really made me think, so what is this all about, and why am I doing things that I'm not really care about, not very meaningful to me? And how am I gonna change that on a day-to-day basis? So that's when I just started looking at the world as a green field again, just cleaning the slate and thinking, what am I gonna do that I can feel passionate about every day and go to sleep knowing, feeling good about it. So I started writing, I started doing design, I started making films, just things that really got me into my work. And through that exercise, I didn't even realize it at the time, I started prioritizing what really meant something to me. My own core values, if you will, although I didn't call it at that time. And the money, title, status stuff clearly faded away. And in the end, it was my connection with my relationships was number one. And so through that, that's how kind of serendipity led me to become a consultant at Zappos, and I started consulting there probably almost 8-9 years ago. And it opened this whole new world of, business doesn't have to be what it was for me at KPMG. It can actually be about people, and it can actually work and be profitable and successful while caring for people. And that's kind of my journey of where I am today. And so now with this company that the book has evolved into, Delivering Happiness, the question that I get most today is, really, can happiness seriously be used as a model in business and in life? And so, of course, the biggest sort of example that we have in just my experience is Zappos. So, is anyone familiar with that company? So, as you guys know, it's in Henderson. And there really is a rainbow over it every day, as you have seen. But what I think is cool about Zappos is this quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you did, people will forget what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And this is a quote I love just for my personal life. But what's cool about Zappos is they use this to drive their everyday decisions. It really is about how we make people feel. And this is a picture of the warehouse in Kentucky. Someone might call it a woman's dream closet. Others might call it a man's ultimate nightmare. But what's really cool about this, and again, if you guys are here in Vegas, I highly recommend taking a tour. It's Monday through Thursday, 3 times a day, but it's just a real experience to see how Zappos is really run. It's amazing how people actually gets work done, actually, but it's really cool to see. So this warehouse here, there's so much technology that has been invested in this, and it's a really amazing piece of, way to fulfill shoes, and now clothing, etc. But all that investment and time and effort was not for the sake of saying, hey, we have cool technology. All of that investment was made for one thing. It's for the customer experience. And so the fact that someone in New York can place an order for shoes right before they go to bed, and in the morning they wake up right before they go to work, the shoes are on the doorstep, that's why the investment is made. It's because they're having that wow effect where someone goes, wow, how did that happen? And they tell a friend, and they tell their family, and so on. But it really is about having a meaningful connection with people. meaningful connection with the customers. For example, one of the things they started implementing recently is when someone calls in, a customer calls in, they'll find out where the call is coming from, and they'll try to route it to someone that's working in the customer service team that's from that area. So if it's someone from Austin, they're trying to find that some person that has a history of being in Austin, lived in Austin before, so they can have a connection about, the bakery down the street or their favorite restaurant. But what's interesting about Zappos is that most people think of customer service when they think of Zappos, but in reality, internally, the number one priority for Zappos is company culture. And the thought behind that is that if you get your company culture right, all those other things like great customer service, profitability, actually comes naturally. And what's interesting, what happened with Zappos is kind of almost like an experiment in the making of thinking, this kind of makes sense, let's try this out. But what we also now know is that there's been a lot of research and data picked up on different companies that believe the same thing and realize that it's things like culture and things like having a really strong company culture and higher purpose that make companies successful. Some of you might recognize the ex-mayor here, but how do we make something as intangible and fluffy as culture a priority? I won't go over all of these, it's kind of hard to read, sorry, but one of the ways is that Zappos pays $4,000 for people to finish, after they finish their training, to quit. And the thought is, after 5 weeks of training, a lot of that is about customer service. People, whether you're in legal or technology, whatever, you have to go through this customer service program so you have a real feel of what that is. And after that 5 weeks, there's a standing offer of $4,000 for these candidates to quit. And the thought behind that is the way that Zappos puts such a high priority in culture, we want to make sure that everyone that's accepting that offer and accepting the job is really committed to what culture really means to Zappos. Another way that culture is such a high, high priority in general is this culture book. And this culture book is something we do every year. It's an annual snapshot. Basically, we ask all of our employees, and now we're doing customers and partners and vendors, to write 2 or 3 paragraphs of what they feel Zappos culture means to them. And we print all of it, and it's totally unedited, so that we can get a real, accurate snapshot of what are we doing well, what are we doing not so well, and is culture, as a company gets bigger, getting stronger, or is it getting weaker over time? And by the way, if anyone wants to email me, we actually send these out to anyone that requests ones in the world. So I have my email address at the end of the presentation. And as I was saying earlier, there's other research and studies being done on what Zappos is just an example of, but other companies have shown that if you have priorities on culture, company culture, and having a higher purpose so your employees are actually inspired to go to work, not just motivated, like a carrot on a stick kind of analogy, but more of, hey, I want to do this because I want to deliver happiness to the world, or I want to make a change in the world. So while all this is going on the Zappos side, what was interesting in the last few years is kind of a generally new sort of field of study is this thing called science of happiness. And just a few kind of lessons learned from all these different books around this. This is at the last section of Delivering Happiness, but basically we found there's like a few frameworks that we can look at to see how we can actually increase our well-being, our long-term sustainable happiness in the course of the day. One framework is having perceived control of your life, so making decisions that you feel that are guiding you directly. Perceived progress, feeling that you're actually growing and learning in different ways that you'd like to. Connectedness, the number of friendships and relationships and the breadth and depth of those. And a higher purpose, doing something that's bigger than just yourself for the world. This is another framework really quickly. It's called Maslow's hierarchy based on that. But basically, the thought here is that if you have the bottom 2 tiers, your physiological needs, if you're safe at night, if you have food, if you have roof over your head, then all the other things that come on top of that, like, for example, let's say the money, title, status thing, doesn't actually add to your levels of happiness. In fact, other things, like I had mentioned before, show that those are the things that actually help you raise your level of happiness, like having a higher purpose. Here's another framework that we like to go by, and this kind of measures the level of time of the different types of happiness. There's 3 types here. And the first one is what we call rock star, because it's about pleasure and it's most fleeting kind of happiness. It's great to have. I mean, it's kind of like going out and partying with your friends one night, having a perfect date, winning an award. It's like a real like a shoot of injection and a high, which is nice, but unfortunately it's not sustainable, unless of course you're a rock star. The second kind of happiness that we point to is something we call passion. And these concepts of engagement with your friends and your families and your coworker. And this concept called flow, when you're doing something and it feels like, hours go by, but in reality, it just feels like minutes because you're so engaged in it. Like athletes do this all the time when they're just hitting three-pointers, time after time after time. And when you ask them later, like, what were you thinking? Like, nothing, because I was so in the moment, in that state. And the concept is actually a psychological concept developed by Csikszentmihalyi and rumor says that he developed this flow of concept when he tried to say his name 10 times really fast. And the last, as I had mentioned before, is this whole concept of having a higher purpose and a greater meaning of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis in affecting the world. So I guess what's interesting about this is that if these are the measurements and the data shows that this is how we can sustain our long-term happiness, so why don't we focus on the higher purpose stuff first? And things like being engaged and things like having that rock star pleasure high is more like icing on the cake. And this is the last sort of revelation we had as Zappos was growing and doing its thing, and the studies of science happiness were kind of like getting bigger and bigger. The realization is that these frameworks actually align whether you're a business or in real life. At the bottom, like for a business, profits is a necessary thing. For us as humans, pleasure is a necessary thing. But then if you look at the other things that stack on top of that, with the passion and ultimately the higher purpose, they're analogous. And that was an interesting thing that kind of, I guess, justified what the thinking was behind Zappos and why it's in the position where it is today. And so Delivering Happiness, again, as you guys know, started as a book. We're now up to 18 languages, did pretty well in the lists and everything, but what is, that's just part of the book, and it really wasn't about the book itself. It was actually more about the meaning behind it and the message. And so what was cool and interesting was that we kind of expected, that businesses would respond and say, yeah, this is great. How can I apply it to my own business? But we didn't expect the non-business community to respond as well. We had emails every day. We still get them from people. There was a guy, he's a trader in New York. He said he was on the verge of suicide until he read the book. And he's like, I'm not jumping up for joy, but now I kind of see a glimmer of light. There's this woman a mom, and emailed us and said, thanks for writing this book. I'm now going to be the CMP of my household, the chief managing parent. And I want to instill core values with my kids because I'm a good mom, but I know I can be better. And these emails would just, keep on continuing, and eventually just from around the world, we get people from Korea, get people from South America telling us that, their own stories of how they were inspired to make some sort of change, whether it's at business, whether it's in their family, or their own community. So that's why, I guess, in the end, we felt compelled that we should develop a company around it, and we should call it a movement, because basically that's what it is. It's basically the people that have been reaching out to us saying, this is awesome, this is what I'm doing. And the notion of feeling that, if this is the person who's doing it over here, I'm sure someone else can be inspired by that story and do something in their own life. And so that's why we announced the movement. And our one purpose is to spread and inspire happiness to the world. And for us, it makes scientific sense based on the science of happiness. It makes business sense based on the story of Zappos, and just makes common human sense. Like, why wouldn't we, if we could, raise the happiness quotient in the world? These are the things of our how. We have an acronym called ICEE, one of those things you drink at 7-Eleven. First one, I being inspiration. Sorry about that. It's my necklace. Inspire and be inspired. The second one is community. Our number one focus is just creating a platform so people can actually, this community that's growing organically, can interact in a meaningful way. Third letter, education, and we want to try and educate people and empower people on what we've learned and still are learning every day about the science of happiness. And the last one is experiences, creating meaningful experiences for people, because we know at the end of the day it's not the car we buy or the shoes we wear. Don't tell Zappos that, but basically, it is about the meaningful experiences we have with other people and ourselves in life. So this is where we are today. We just announced the movement South by Southwest last year in March. 2011. Our community has grown to 130 countries. We're in 1,200 cities, and this is just, since March. So what's really exciting for me is that because of this, like, other businesses are coming out of the woodwork and saying, hey, you know what, I've been actually doing something similar too, and this is how we do it. And so we're becoming this platform, matchmaking, basically, of all these people are doing it in their own way, and somehow we're going to share that knowledge with everyone else so that we can possibly, as a world, become a happier place. So this is our vision of end of year 2012, a world of having a sustainable happiness, both at work, at home, and in our communities. And for some reason, Winky, the smiley face usually was on this slide, but I guess he took a break today. But this is kind of the imagination that I want to envision. It's like, imagine, like, as I started this conversation, we're thinking, we're so super bad at predicting what makes us long-term sustainably happy. How can we make this super good? How can we make this world actually a happier place? We have the benefit of all the advances of generations before. We're like relatively lucky. We're not afraid of basically walking out a door and getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. These are all things, like, the conditions are right to actually say that this is not, some far-off dream. It could be a reality for us. So when I do these TED Talks, I always do a little dare of, people are thinking, so what next? So my dare is, wherever you are in your life, for the next 30 days, dare to follow your own passion. Dare to, if you have a higher purpose, define it even more or refine it even more. Just dare to be yourself and be really, really true to your voice. And then ask, at the end of 30 days, was there a difference in my everyday life? Was there a difference in my days? Was I a happier person? And so I guess I just wanted to share where we are today as a movement. The biggest part of this, again, is the people. And if you've read the book or somehow take this message and apply it to your life, I'd love to hear from you. My email address is Jenn with 2 N's at deliveringhappiness.com. And if you like the Zappos culture book, I'll send that to you, or just shoot me an email if you like a copy of this presentation. But I'd love for you to consider this, that maybe together we can actually nudge this world to a happier place. Thank you.